I'm attorney Gregory Dell, and I'm joined by attorney Stephen Jessup. And today we're going to talk about emergency room physicians and their long-term disability claims. And specifically, we'll talk about issues that come up when applying, things that we've seen in denials from representing probably well over 100 emergency room physicians. And Steve, getting into understanding the occupation of an emergency room physician, because often I find that the claims rep, maybe they've been to the ER and they've seen a doctor, but they don't have a good understanding as to really how demanding the job is of an ER physician. So what are the issues that you've seen in terms of presenting the occupation to a disability carrier to really explain what an ER physician does?
Well, that's a really good point you make, because I don't think they necessarily do. I mean, I don't think a lot of people understand what ER physicians do until you have to visit the ER, especially when it's crowded. And there's a lot of, patients coming in, and they are basically, frontline triage workers of all kinds of situations that come in from, you might have gunshot wounds, things that require immediate action and surgery. You might have, a plethora of I'm just not feeling good. So these are doctors that don't have the luxury of specializing in one area of medicine where they know what type of patient is coming in. It's the same general, situation it may be. They have to be ready for pretty much anything. And they have to also be able to, at times very quickly make a determination as to what specialists may need to be done, what may be going on, so the proper course of treatment can be had. So there is no typical day, if you will. There are going to be codes that are going to be billed that insurance companies will take a look at. But I think the biggest thing is that in a lot of ways, outside, I guess, of the actual physical nature of orthopedic surgery, it's probably the most physically demanding, in my opinion, of all the medical professions, just because you're in an ER, you're going from room to room, seeing patients, you may be performing some type of surgery, evaluations, examinations, and then organizing this level of chaos to make it work, to make sure these people are going to get the right care. If there's a hospitalist there, getting them, so you can coordinate with treating physicians and all that type of stuff. So there's really no typical day for an ER physician, and I think the insurance companies don't necessarily understand that, and they try to fit them into a box of, well, what does a surgeon do? What does an internal medicine doctor do? And then if they go even so far as to try to pull all these generic job descriptions, that really doesn't help much of anything at all.
Well, when they try to pull the nonsense with the Dictionary of Occupational Titles and say, well, it's a light to medium duty job, first of all, that's crazy, because I would never classify it as anything other than a minimum heavy duty. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know, ER physician is crazy. You don't know who's walking through the door at any given time. You don't know any history. Sometimes the patients are unconscious. You don't know anything, and you got to act immediately. Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned there are some who work in triage level 1 facilities, and there's others that aren't the facilities where they're helicoptering, patients in continuously. But the reason we say heavy duty, and if you look even like a national economy standard saying how is it performed all over the place, is often patients unconscious or patients whatever their injury is, you got to lift them up, whether it's tilt them up, put them down, and clearly lifting over 100 pounds, which would be the threshold for heavy duty, is important. Now, that's to say if lifting is even a restriction of a person, but you were touching on before, you mentioned briefly about they may look at their codes. Mm-hmm. And with ER physicians, there really isn't a lot of codes like we would see with the other doctors, because it's basically like level 1, level 2, level 3 exam, mm-hmm. whatever it may be. And so it's hard you can't really tell specifically what's going on. But one thing we do know for sure is that let's assume most people are disabled by pain. How do you prove the cognitive impact of dealing with the pain and trying to manage your duties as being an ER physician?
Well, I always tell people it should be a logical step. It should be something that's relatively understood. I think on a basic level, all insurance companies would understand how being in pain and trying to work through pain can affect your mental acuity, but they prefer to play dumb to that. I have had, you and I have worked on cases for ER doctors where the pain was such an issue that not even from a functional limitation standpoint, but even after an hour or so, they're in enough pain that they have a hard time concentrating, focusing, finding words, all that type of stuff. So we've utilized neuropsychological testing in certain situations to really kind of hash out that cognitive. And a lot of people think, oh, neuropsychological testing, that's for brain injuries, that's for mental health conditions. But with the right doctor and preparing the doctor, the neuropsychologist, the doctor to know what the issues are medically speaking, what the job duties are, what is bringing on these problems, you will see that when they do this testing, they can document where there's going to be cognitive decline after a certain amount of time. Especially, neuropsychological testing is done in a sitting position. So at some point, if you're so uncomfortable from just sitting alone, that you're getting, negative test scores, you're showing deficits. Imagine if you are up on your feet, like you said, examining patients, lifting patients, bending, twisting, pushing, pulling, all these various different things that you're going to be doing throughout the course of treatment. A bad neck, say if the neck's really bad. I mean, even getting in and out of, medical, not even equipment, but face masks, any of the gowns and stuff like that. It's just this repetitive. And at the end of the day, with doctors, we always say this idea of patient safety, do no harm. And if your condition is impacting you, right? You're having these problems, the pain is getting unbearable, hard time concentrating, losing focus. There's a direct risk, especially as an ER physician, to the safety and well-being of the patient. And that patient safety is always a top of concern for any doctor, and it needs to be. And at some point, trying to work through any issues, pain, conditions they may have is negatively affecting, their ability to perform the duties of the utmost care for their patient.
The unique thing about ER physicians is they work shifts, and they're usually a 12-hour shift, and they usually work about 3 days a week, give or take. So disability carers like to argue, well, you only need to work. You could split it up. You could work 3 days a week. You could rest, this kind of thing, and that really becomes a challenge. And I always talk about preparing the doctor for the disability claim. And these are the scenarios where you have the client, which is most of our clients who are chronic in nature, didn't just get a diagnosis because they had an auto accident or they fell doing something with their kid or whatever. The issue is that most of the ER physicians that present their claims and have problems is that they work with their diagnosis for a year or two. And you go and look at their schedule because they ask for your reporting and your work schedule, and you don't see any reduction or loss of time of work. You definitely don't see a loss of income usually because they're usually employed by the hospital and they're getting a salary. And then the disability carrier goes, look, we don't doubt your diagnosis. There's no doubt about that. But diagnosis doesn't equal disability. And we're concerned that that you're not as limited as you're telling us. And so what do you see that the disability carriers, besides just looking at the records, will try to use against the doctor to say that you're not as disabled as you're telling us?
Well, I think the big one is right there, Greg. ER doctors will generally work through these issues, whether it's hoping nothing happens while they're on shift. Insurance companies will sometimes get indignant that, when we say, well, that may be your position, but what if it was you or a family member who's going in at hour 10 of a shift where you have a doctor who's in a lot of pain or isn't able to focus, with the level of care that you would want for yourself or a family member. But that is the big one, is are they cutting back? I've seen also investigations if there's been any complaints in medical boards, what the general well-being of the hospital is. Have there been layoffs? I've seen all this stuff investigated by insurance companies to see if there's some rationale that this person is trying to get out, if you will, other than it's their medical condition. And you're right, they're going to look at what's in your medical records, and yes, they can acknowledge that you have that problem, but you need to draw that nexus that it's resulting in a disability, and disability has to do with the ability to do the job. If you're gutting it out and continuing to do the job, surely you have the diagnosis, there's no question, but you may not contractually have that disability underneath the policy.
Right, and the other thing, Steve, is outside of work is the issues that the ER physician has to be aware of, which is the video surveillance. They're going to run video surveillance of them. They're going to see them on their day off, going to the store, going to Home Depot to do a project, or going to their kid's ball game and throwing the ball or whatever it is. And then they're going to say, well, we saw you do that for 2 hours, so we think you could do a 12-hour shift at your work, which is usually ridiculous from what we see on video, but highly relied upon. Of course, social media as well. If the ER physician has social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever it may be, is all going to be viewed, and you need to
100%.
The doctor really needs to be aware of that as well. The other issue, Steve, that we see a lot with ER physicians. ER physicians are in the hospitals. They're surrounded by doctors of every medical specialty. So you get an ER physician who calls us and says, my back's bad. I had an MRI a year and a half ago. I know I got a herniated disc. And then the next question we say is, well, who have you been treating with? And they say, well, an orthopedic surgeon looked at it for me at the hospital, and I talked to him every 2 or 3 months about it. He looked at it. I know what it is. Maybe I took some anti-inflammatories. I tried a little therapy on my own. And then we say, well, do you have that documented? And they say, no. Why is that a problem in terms of presenting the claim?
Hearsay then. You don't have the paper trail. Insurance companies are big on paper trail. The better and more and the better quality documentation you have, the better your case is. I had this conversation with so-and-so. I mean, that's just taking someone's word at face value, and an insurance company is not going to do that. But you are right. That's more so than probably most other of the doctors, because they're always coming into contact with all the different specialties. They just have, professional conversations, if you will. Like we've said to doctors in the past is, you want to have good patients. Well, you need to be a good patient as well. You need to get this documented. So it's good if a doctor who's thinking, hey, maybe this is getting worse, I'm having some problems. If you're even thinking about filing for disability, to call, because, in representation, we are thinking about, hey, you need to get into these doctors. It needs to start being documented, just so we have the information to back up what you're saying. It's not that we don't believe you, obviously, but we need to prove it to an insurance company. It's a completely different standard where common sense and logic may not be enough. You need the concrete evidence. And then also, too, with those work schedule, like, we discussed here, they're on 12-hour shifts. If there can be accommodations with shifts and things of that nature, that does get a little tricky, because obviously hospitals only employ so many. And I've run into problems with that and doctors getting accommodations. But I've also seen where some hospitals have gone to great lengths to try to give accommodations to a doctor to help with that out. And generally, too, one thing, if you're looking for an accommodation, your employer, the hospital, is not going to do it without some type of indication from your doctor that you need it. So it's very important that the doctor is a good patient and is making sure that they're getting in. They're getting the recommended treatment, care, getting the diagnostic testing that may be there. Not to mention, you brought up, when they say, oh, I had an MRI a year and a half ago, it showed a herniated disc. Same thing with an insurance company. Well, you worked for a year and a half with that herniated disc. What changed? It's not what happened in the past. What's going on right now is always going to be some of the most relevant information. So you got to get into a doctor. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That's a non-negotiable for any disability claim.
The other thing, then probably there's so many issues I want to talk about, but the last one we'll cover today is most ER physicians are either employed directly by the hospital or they're employed by a group. Mm-hmm. And if at some point in their career they didn't buy a disability policy on their own, mm-hmm. which they may have, and often we have a lot of ER physicians who bought a policy on their own, which is fantastic because those are the best kind of policies. But a lot of the ER physicians also have an employer-provided policy because they are employed by a group or a hospital. The level of scrutiny is so much higher, and the rights for the person who has this group policy, because it's going to be governed on ERISA. In 60 seconds, can you just describe why the ERISA policy, which is the employer-provided one, versus the individual one, is a disadvantage for the doctor, and why they have to be that much more prepared in bringing a claim?
With 60 seconds, reason mine is there's no financial disincentive for an insurance company under an employer-provided policy to give you hell. I mean, realistically, that's what it is. Legally speaking, in court, in the vast majority, courts in the country, they are going to have the advantage in trial. They know that, and even if they're wrong, even if you fast forward, a judge says you're wrong, the only thing technically they owe you is money they haven't paid you. So the risk to them is much lower. They know this. So their level of scrutiny that they're going to put on one of those cases far exceeds under an individual private policy, because under those policies you have the full weight of state court, jury trials, all these various different factors. And one thing with the ER physicians, going back to the point with these policies, I've seen, I'm sure you've seen too, where they do have the private policies, but as soon as they got the group provided, employer provided policy that's going to pay 60%, more often those group policies pay a higher amount of monthly benefit than the private ones. So they think, oh, I don't need to increase my private coverage, I got this. And those employer provided policies, they're really nowhere near as good as what you can get going through an agent. So if you have those policies, or that's the only policy or the main source, you really need to make sure all your information is as tight and as detailed as possible, because this insurance company does not want to pay you. And if they know that their likelihood of success in court is going to be greater than yours, you better believe they're going to find any reason to deny that claim.
Right, and the issue we're talking about is an ERISA governed plan. Then I suggest for an ER physician who doesn't know what ERISA is to search our website as to what is ERISA and what does it mean to have to do an ERISA appeal and why is ERISA a bad law. We talk about it all the time, but it's really not fair because you have no right to a jury trial, no punitive damages, and basically there's no risk for the insurance company to deny the claim compared to a private claim. So that's the nutshell summary of that.
That's a nutshell of 30-some years of litigation.
Yeah. So if you are an ER physician, certainly we always offer a free initial consultation. I recommend that you give Stephen, myself, or any of our disability lawyers a call. We're going to immediately review your policy if you're in the process of filing a claim or considering filing a claim. If you've been denied, we'll immediately review your denial letter and let you know right away how we can help you. Another great thing that you may have already done is that we suggest you go to our website and search your insurance company, because we have lots of information about your company, such as frequently asked questions, hundreds of articles that we've written, comments from people that have had experiences similar to yours. And we really want all of our clients to be educated about this process, because the more you learn as a client about what to expect, the better you can prepare yourself moving forward in putting yourself in the best position to get approved. And that's what this is all about, is getting the disability carrier to pay you, and you have to be educated as the insured as to what is needed. And it's a new process for you because it's not what you do, and we understand that, and we work with you to get you there. So we're available to help you anywhere in the country. Give us a call at any time, and we'll always be here when you need us. Thank you for considering our law firm.